you. Living in Egypt, what must it be like? How often have we all felt like we were sojourners living in a foreign land? I think about what it's like to be a Southerner. I mean, I find it really galling that other people in southern states don't think Texas is part of the South, because we know that it is, right? We know that it is. We know Texas might be a little bit different, but it's basically Southern. And we know that it's unique, like the southern states, because when people come here from parts unknown, like, is there a place like California, I think, something like that, Seattle, I think there's another state called New York. When they end up there, they're like ducks out of water. Their eyes are like pinwheels. They don't know what's going on. My mother used to say, that anything above the Mason-Dixon line is, that's Yankee territory. Now, if there are any Northerners in the room today, I will apologize on the front end, but not real hard. But you have pride wherever you live. And wherever you live, there are certain very distinct characteristics. And for those of us who live in the South, we worried about things. We think that people ought to stay close by. Families ought to live near each other. They ought to continue to go to the same church or the same kind of church. Their children need to marry someone that they know about. Don't bring someone home that we've never heard of, never seen. It's going to take some time. We still sort of expect for young men to talk to fathers about whether or not it's okay to marry your daughter, because we want to get a look-see. We're worried that if one of our children, male or female, meets someone in college that lives up north, they're going to stay up north above that Mason-Dixon line, and they're going to lose all the good traditions. Their cornbread dressing is going to turn into some sort of white bread mush. They're not going to fry their chicken in a deep fried situation. It's not going to be right. And hospitality, that's like a thing here. Whether or not we really want you to come over, we're going to invite you over and make you stay. We're going to tell you over and over again that we've just been waiting for you to come and bring everybody. And then when you come, we're going to shovel you in the house and shut the door. And then finally, when that group of people is able to leave and they emerge into the sunlight and the door is shut behind them, we say, well, I thought they'd like to never leave. So we have quirks in the South. But it sure does feel strange to go somewhere else, doesn't it? I think about all those dreams Joseph had. He was supposed to just be in the South, as it were. Actually, it was the North for him. He's living in Nazareth, close to Bethlehem. He's supposed to be marrying the nice hometown girl. Everybody's approved it. Then she becomes pregnant. And he has to be told in the dream, don't worry about it, it'll be okay. He takes her to Bethlehem where Jesus is born. Then he's told in the dream that he better take his son to Egypt because Herod, who acts like a bully because he's ultimately insecure about anything that comes into his Roman world, which may wield any kind of power, is certain that he must do away with this child about whom people are speaking. The Magi also experienced dreams. They go a different direction. By the way, they were Northerners, and they came south. So then Jesus is taken to Egypt. How in the world are they they going to survive in Egypt? Do they even speak the same language? I don't know. What in the world? And then in another dream, a third dream, Joseph is told to bring his son back after Herod dies. We don't really know how old Jesus was when he came back. But he wasn't a baby anymore. Matthew is the only place where we read this part of the story. It's really fascinating. And just as an aside, I want to mention to you that as hostile and as strange as it might seem for Joseph to have to go even farther south to Egypt, from the Judean countryside to Egypt, think of the good things that happened for the nation of Israel in that southern land. Moses was Jewish, but saved by the Pharaoh's daughter and preserved in a particular way so that he could lead his people out of captivity. Joseph, thrown down in a well, taken as a slave, rose to power in Egypt and saved his own people again in the middle of a famine. And now Jesus went south again and preserved so that he might come back and save his people. Living in Egypt, we know it's not easy. The Pharaoh's not always nice. The Jewish people are not always treated well. But somehow, going to another place, south, just so happens to be, and hitting the reset button is essential for the story of God. For the narrative of the salvation of God's people all the way through the Old Testament and into the New Testament, beginning with the story of Jesus. How can that be? Wait a minute. Are we all supposed to stick together? It's the buddy system, right? We're supposed to huddle up, strength in numbers, circle the wagons, right? How can that be? My mother would not let me go to the ice cream palace on my bicycle or to Skiller's for candy without a friend. But let me tell you something. Every time I made one of those neighborhood trips, just right outside the perimeter of the safe zone, I got a little more confident. And mysteriously and magically, the gigantic, large, blue Oldsmobile Cutlass stopped following me because I became competent at riding my bicycle and avoiding cars that would kill me. But you see, when we move beyond the safe zone, as it were, the familiar zone, God gives us things that we could never acquire otherwise. And they are tools in our tool belt that will enable us to come back and be saviors for the people around us. Not like Jesus, but to be instrument of God's love and grace to someone else. It wasn't until I did mission work down on the Texas-Mexican border that I really understood what it meant to work hard, to sweat hard, to accomplish things with very little support or resources. That helps me. It wasn't until I went to seminary and got my master's and then worked on my doctorate, that I learned some things that I needed to know to preach better sermons, teach more complete lessons. And it was not fun in either place. Wasn't home. Definitely wasn't home in South Bend, Indiana for that doctor's degree. And it wasn't home when I sat around a table with Muslim imams and Jewish priests and Quakers and all manner of Christians and faithful people and heard their viewpoints and disagreed with them and agreed with them, that I became even more well-versed in my faith and more confident in what I believe and able to jettison the things that were not essential. You see how those unexpected journeys can change us even when they hurt? Sometimes we go through a death and we think, I'll never come out of this. And then suddenly we realize within 3 to 6 months that we're talking to someone else who's experiencing the same thing. And we have more than we could say about it. And it's because we had to go to Egypt and see what that was like. And you can fill in the blank. Bankruptcy, divorce, depression, serious illness. It's not until you go to Egypt that more is added to your character and you're better equipped to do the will of God. I wonder what happened to Mary and Joseph when they went to Egypt. Jesus was a baby. There wasn't much that he could do. But imagine what his parents had to learn. How to survive when people weren't kind and nice. How to make a living in an unfamiliar place. How to maintain the confidence and strength needed when you don't have your friends and family around you. Can you imagine how desperately that was needed when Jesus began his ministry? And then when he went to the cross? How would they have survived that? How would they have supported him in his ministry if they hadn't been forced to Egypt? Ask yourself about all those trips to Egypt that you've had to take. Unplanned trips. Trips forced upon you by mean people, by bad circumstances, through frailty and failure. Circumstances in the world over which we have no control, and suddenly you're in Egypt and you don't know which way is up or down, north or south. What do you do? Who do you rely on? How do you survive? On Thanksgiving without your cornbread dressing. You learn to like white bread dressing. You take the resources that you didn't know you had. You put them together in a recipe. And you create for yourself a meaningful culture of God that sustains you, whether you're in Egypt or Jerusalem or the countryside of Judea or Tyler, Texas. When we take communion, we're going to be entering into communion with Jesus Christ. He went to Judea. He went places harder than that. Caesarea Philippi. The living room of Pontius Pilate. angry crowds demanding his death. The garden where he cried blood, and the cross, Golgotha. All of that was Egypt. And in every one of those places, the strength and the power of God was never more real. Thanks be to God for the struggles that make us strong and that ultimately save us. Let us turn in our hymnal